excited to be here. Can I use one of these handhelds instead of the... Should I pull this off of here?
Pull it off. Go ahead and pull it off.
Pull it off. But I'm going to move this thing out of the way because I'm not very graceful and I'll hurt myself. You know, I appreciate what the ladies are doing, the cheerleaders are doing. But you know, they're actually just exemplifying the spirit of the women who founded this nation. The spirit. And I think what they're doing is extremely ladylike. You see, I think that it's about time we taught our daughters how to fight like girls. Because we've been teaching them a lie way too long. The lie that the women during our founding of our nation were weak and oppressed and beaten by overbearing chauvinistic husbands who hated women. Nothing could be further from the truth. The women that founded this nation were brave, strong, resolved. And I hate to tell you this, guys, they sacrificed a whole lot more than the men did. And they did it for liberty. Mercy Otis Warren, one of our great founding mothers, whom I love to quote, often talked about why they were doing it, why they were fighting. She said that they were ready to devote their ready to sacrifice their devoted lives to preserve inviolate and to convey to their children the inherent rights of men conferred on all by God of nature and the privileges of Englishmen claimed by Americans from the sacred sanction of compacts. You see, they did it for their children. And they sacrificed a whole lot. You know, I think it's about time that we teach our daughters something that Hannah Winthrop said. She said, and be it known unto Britain, even American daughters are politicians and patriots, and will aid the good work with their female efforts. When I teach my 5-hour seminar that covers the history in a little bit more detail than what I can give you tonight, I talk about these women. You've all heard of the Boston Tea Party, right? Have you been introduced to Penelope Barker? Penelope Barker held the second Tea Party, just 10 months after the men threw tea in the harbor. And they signed a pledge and threw a little jab at the men. They signed a pledge and said, we are signing our names to this document, not hiding ourselves behind costumes like the men in Boston did. The British will know who we are. You see, does that sound like a woman who's afraid? It sounds like a bunch of women who know how to fight like girls. But I'm assuming you're here because you think the country's headed in the right direction, right? That's sarcasm.
Yeah, that's sarcasm.
Well, do you know that we are not a reflection of our government? Our government is a reflection of its people. Because we are a government of the people, by the people, for the people. The Constitution, the Declaration of Independence says that our government was created among men. Not over them, by the way. Something Washington doesn't understand. Not only that, the government is supposed to receive its just powers from the consent of the governed. Hard news here. They're doing what they're doing because we've consented. Either by act or omission. Right? Because they both produce results, whether we like it or not. We have got to start taking our oaths more seriously if we intend to see Washington, D.C. taking their oaths more seriously. Because after all, if you take an oath and you have no idea what it means, it's as if you've taken no oath at all. And I'm afraid that's what's happening to our politicians. When they raise their hand and pledge to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, they have no idea what they're saying.
Right, that's right.
They have no understanding whatsoever of the Constitution. And stop thinking they do simply because they went to law school and had a constitutional law class. Because I've been there and I can tell you, constitutional law classes do not teach anything about the Constitution. As a matter of fact, they teach something more dangerous than not teaching the Constitution. They teach that the opinions of men are more relevant than the Constitution itself and the men who wrote it. You wonder how we can get the 2 Supreme Court rulings that we got, right? Because they have no idea what the Constitution means anymore. But we just took an oath, didn't we? Isn't that what the Pledge of Allegiance is, an oath? You put your hand over your heart, didn't you? That's where God lives. That's why you shake hands with God while you're doing your Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag. Do we pledge allegiance to a flag? No. To the United States of America, right? To the republic for which it stands. Notice it doesn't say democracy. Now we have got to really get going here on a few minor details that are having major effects. Stop allowing your elected politicians to refer to this nation as a democracy. It is not. They're not the same thing. If we had been a democracy, the civil rights movement would have failed. If we had been a democracy, ladies, we would not be voting today. Because in a democracy, the mob rules. The mob always overpowers the minority. And our founders knew what they were doing when they created a republic. Because only in a republic can liberty prosper. Only in a republic can a minority have a society-changing voice. And if we allow these people who are supposed to be representing us run around this country and refer to us as a democracy, watch out, that's what we'll become. And then the next thing you know, we'll live in real tyranny, because that's what democracy is. But we pledge allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands. One nation under God, indivisible. Are we still one nation under God? I mean, human nature dictates that when we have a need, not I'm hungry and I need to go to McDonald's need, but a need. I'm hungry, there's no food in the pantry, I have no job, there's no money, and I'm about to lose my house need. When we have a need like that, we will fall and cry to a provider for help. And at that moment, we have a choice to make. 2 options only. We're either one nation under God, and God is our provider, or we're one nation under government, and government is our provider. I wish we said the Pledge of Allegiance like this: one nation under God, indivisible. Because those words go together for a purpose. Only when we are one nation under God are we indivisible. Because once we become one nation under government, we are immediately divided. Race war, class war, war on women, you name it. Because you see, the bottom line is, we are a government of the people, by the people, for the people. That means we hold the power. we submit to the government to be our provider, they want that power from us. So they have to divide to conquer us. They have to divide us to keep us weak. Because when we come together, that's when we understand that we are the bearers of the power and the authority. And they are supposed to listen to us. When they divide us, then we start to think, well, am I crazy? Am I really an extremist? Am I really radical? Am I really fringe like they say I am? No. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now that's where we hit. If we don't understand what liberty is, we can never get to that injustice for all thing. Because if we don't really understand what liberty is, we are sold a bill of goods that that injustice for all thing is the same thing as social justice. But it's not. You see, liberty is where it begins for us. It is the fundamental focus of the founders of this nation, regardless of which side you were on. Generally the Federalists or the Anti-Federalists. They were both focused on liberty, which is why we have the Constitution and the Bill of Rights that we have. The greatest miracle of compromise between two people, two groups of people who had different ideas, focused on the same goal. John Adams said, liberty must be supported at all hazards. In 1765, liberty must be supported at all hazards. Did you notice he didn't say health care? Can I tell you something that might sting a little bit? Because if you don't know me yet, you'll figure out I don't pull punches. He didn't say your Social Security either. He didn't say your Medicaid or your Medicare or your economy or your job. He said liberty must be supported at all hazards. Because he knew without liberty you'd have none of those things. Have you heard Patrick Henry's speech, give me liberty or give me death? Right? He said, what would gentlemen wish? What would they want? Is life so dear and peace so sweet to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but give me liberty or give me death. Now the easy review of that, we all know, Patrick was telling us, I don't even want to live if I can't have liberty, right? Isn't that what he was saying? But let's look a little bit closer there. See what he was really saying. Didn't he ask a question, right? What would gentlemen wish? What would they want? He was asking a new birthing nation, what could be our greatest achievement? As we are coming together and creating a nation, what could be the greatest achievement of any nation of people? And then he answers that question. He says, life and peace. Right? Because the greatest accomplishment of any nation of people is the right to life and the right to live that life peaceably. But then he puts it on, he gives us a little problem there. He says, are those things so dear that we would purchase them with chains and slavery? He was telling us that without liberty, your very life will be servitude. Without liberty, your peace. Can I put that in modern day terms for you? Your national security will become your chains and your bonds. That's why John Adams said liberty must be supported at all hazards, because the liberty is the root of all prosperity, all protection. He went on to say, liberty must be supported at all hazards. We have a right to it derived from our Maker. See, John Adams was a student of a principle called natural law. Have you heard of natural law? Natural law teaches that we are created in the image of God. And because we are created in the image of God, we've inherited certain things from God. One thing that we've inherited is freedom. God being the most ultimate free being in the universe. Anybody wake up this morning and tell God how to run things? We like to try, don't we? Well, We've inherited that freedom. Not the power, and certainly not the wisdom. But we have inherited that freedom. But you know what? We don't want to live in a nation that's free. We can't live in a nation that is free. Because if we live in a nation that is built on freedom, where all are free, that means I'm free to lie, I'm free to steal, I'm free to murder. I am free to do whatever is right in my own mind, regardless of how that affects you. That is not liberty, that is anarchy. Because liberty and freedom are not the same thing. Liberty is freedom plus morality. That shared morality that built this nation that says, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder. Sound familiar? It is only when a nation of people has a shared morality can you have liberty. Because then we agree that yes, we are free to do whatever we like. But we must respect other people's freedom as well. We can't interfere with that. Now, we can't live in a nation that's built on the 10 Commandments. Because a nation built on moral law alone is called a theocracy. And theocracies in the hands of men are tyranny, because there's no freedom in them. That's precisely why, ladies and gentlemen, Sharia law has no business in this country.
Amen.
You see, we can debate all day long on foreign law. And I can give you quote after quote after quote of the founders telling us why foreign law, as Washington said, is the most baneful foe of a Republican government. But for me, we don't even have to get that far. Because Sharia law is a theocracy. There's no freedom in it. It is anti-liberty, and it is anti-American. It has no business here. John Adams said, liberty must be supported at all hazards. We have a right to it derived from our Maker, but if we had not, our fathers have bought and purchased it for us with their ease, their estates, their pleasure, and their blood. John's saying, I'm John Adams. I believe liberty is a gift from God, but I also know that men and women have died so that we can have it today. That's what our founders pledged too, wasn't it? Life, fortune, sacred honor. That wasn't an empty pledge. They died by that pledge. They lived by that pledge. You know, it's easy to die for something. It's a whole lot harder to live for it. And they sacrificed everything. Some of them burned their own homes to the ground so that they would not be used by the British. But what does liberty mean to us today? John Adams said our fathers gave everything for it. Now we are pledging life, fortune, and sacred honor for our future. And what does it mean to us? Did you know that statistics show us that 40% of Christians, church-going Christians, only 40% are registered to vote? And of that 40% that are registered to vote, only 40% of those actually vote. Do those numbers in the statistics, and you'll get generously 25% of Christians who go to church actually vote. You wonder why we have to run around and fight and scream and yell that yes, we are a nation built on a Judeo-Christian worldview. Because the government is a reflection of its people, and those who believe the Judeo-Christian worldview are not reflecting very brightly. So if we are going to get this nation back to its founding principles, to where we must be, so that our children will enjoy the liberty that we were given, we have to know what John Adams knew. We have to know that, or we're never going to be able to take that step and say life, fortune, sacred honor. Because don't Fool yourself here. These are the times that try men's souls. And it's not going to be over on November 6th, regardless of who wins. John Adams knew that liberty was not invented by them. It was inherited from his fathers. John Adams knew that in 1041 England, the King of England had made a promise to the people where they could meet with their barons and lords twice a year and express to the barons and lords the things that they liked about government and the things that they didn't like about government. Now the idea was then that the barons and lords would take that information to the king, and then the king would do what with it? Whatever he wanted, right? He's king. He's got no obligation to the people. But it's not about the government. Government never gets liberty because it doesn't belong to them. Liberty is the inherent possession of men, and government has to fight it so that they can have power. The important thing here is that the people are starting to wake up. Did you notice the planting of that very seed of representative government? Meeting twice a year, expressing your likes and your dislikes to someone who's supposed to represent you in the big scheme of things. Well, this king is about to die. The year is 1066. He's about to die, but he has no son that he can crown as king. So he tries to crown his second in command. His name is Harold, to be king. The king likes Harold. The English people like Harold. Harold's going to keep things the way things are going. Problem is, Harold's not got a blood right to the throne. Because kings are not appointed and they're not elected. They're born. And just because this king didn't have a son doesn't mean there wasn't someone with a right to that throne, and there was. His name is William I, and he lives in Normandy. His name is William the Conqueror as well. He raises up his Norman army, goes to England, conquers Harold and the English people, and puts himself, as he feels, in his rightful place on the throne. Now, we've all seen the medieval movies, right? Knights in shining armor kind of thing. This happens all the time. It's no big deal, right? Well, it is. Because this is not just any nation. This is England. And in 1066, England already had the most complex form of government in all medieval times. They had a common law system. A system of law plus morality. And William hates England. Now, we don't have to have William tell us these words. We can just look and see what William has done. You know, William has passed a law that says if you're going to address the speak English, you have to speak French. Can you imagine going to Washington, D.C. and being told by that if you want to speak to your congressman or to the President of the United States, you have to speak a foreign language? Well, if that is all William had done, we probably wouldn't be here today. But William did more. William set about to fundamentally transform England into Normandy. He started replacing the judges in the English common law system with judges that were not loyal to the law, but loyal to the king and his ideology, right? Don't bite the hand that feeds you. Then he started using those judges to enforce his foreign law on the English people. He then started taking the private land from the landowners, running them out of the country even, and then taking their land and giving it to his foreign friends. How else do you keep foreign law in a nation if it's not full of foreigners who respect that law over the local law? He starts imposing arbitrary taxations and then putting his agents loyal to the king, not to the word of God, into the churches. Government loyal agents in the churches to enforce his unconstitutional laws and to collect his taxes. This goes on for about 40 years. William has had 4 sons. His first son dies in an accident. He and his second son get into a huge fight, and his second son runs off to fight in the Crusades, leaving his 2 younger sons to be king of England, William II and Henry I. Now, William II is first in line, so he takes the throne. Shortly after William takes the throne, William and Henry go hunting. And William is killed in a mysterious hunting accident. Right. The people weren't buying that either. So the government tried to appease the people by doing an investigation. They called it a grand tribunal. But you have to understand, that'd be sort of like the Department of Justice investigating Eric Holder for Fast and Furious, right? Well, the results were the same. The government found that Henry was not at fault, but the people still didn't buy it. So Henry had to do a couple things to take the throne without a big problem from the people. The first thing that he did was he married an Anglo-Saxon woman, which was the majority of the population in Great Britain at that time was Anglo-Saxon. It gave them representation on the throne. I mean, how better to appease the people than to appease the majority first, right? Well, the second thing that he did is the most important. Why I've given you all this history. The second thing that he did was he signed the first document in the genealogy of our Constitution. Because our Constitution has a genealogy. Just like if my great-great-grandfather had never lived, I wouldn't be here. Our Constitution has a lineage that had to happen before it could be written. 5 documents over 700 years that had to exist before our framers could even have the spark of inspiration for the Declaration of Independence. And that first document was called the 1100 Charter of Liberties. The 1100 Charter of Liberties was Henry's promise to the people that kings would no longer be evil and oppressive. That's a pretty big promise, isn't it? Listen to what this says. I, Henry, by the grace of God, having been crowned the King of England, shall end all the oppressive practices which have been an evil presence in England. All of them. He made a list. Now, it's not amazing to me that he made a list. What's amazing to me is what is on the list. I'm going to read you 2. If any of my baron or earl shall die, his heirs shall not be forced to purchase their inheritance, but shall retrieve it through force of law and custom. Because in 1100 England, death tax was evil and oppressive. Isn't that what that is when you have to purchase your inheritance from the IRS? Don't buy it back. See how much of it you get. And in 1100 England, that was considered evil and oppressive. I'm not hearing those words from Congress. How about you? I'm not hearing that from us. Well, here's another one. If any of my barons commit a crime, he shall not bind himself to the crown, as was done in the time of my father and brother, but shall stand for the crime as was done before my father, and make amends as are appropriate. Because in 1100 England it was considered evil and oppressive for the men who made the laws to consider themselves above the law. Don't you wish Eric Holder had a little piece of that? Nancy Pelosi, maybe? And Harry Reid, yeah. Now, I was a prosecutor. You call them DAs here, right?
Right.
Yeah. For 7 years, give or take. I worked on the defense side for 2 years in a constitutional law firm where I traveled the country and defended people in support of their First Amendment. So I've had just about 10 years criminal law experience. I watched the Fast and Furious hearings. I can guarantee you 2 things very easily. Number 1, we've not seen all the evidence that Congress has against Eric Holder. Number 2, of the evidence that we have seen, if they had that evidence against me, I would not be getting a finger wagging from Darrell Issa. I would be under a federal prison. Because in this country, if you're the principal to a crime, you're guilty of that crime itself. And Eric Holder is guilty of the murder of Brian Terry. Yes. And how many others now? Yes. Right? Yeah. So all the congressional hand-wringing over what do we do with Eric Holder, it's insulting to me as an attorney. It's infuriating to me as a citizen. Yes. Sign this petition and demand that Eric Holder quit his job. Sign this petition and demand that the president fire Eric Holder. You know what? In my 10 years of criminal law experience, I have never once seen a plea deal that says if your client quits his job, we'll drop the charges.
Right.
But somehow that's okay for Eric Holder?
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. You know that Congress has a duty to impeach, right?
Yes.
It's not just a power, it's a duty. Because if you read Article 2, Section 4, the language says, shall remove from office. That's not a choice. That means if the criteria is met, Congress must remove them. But you know it says, shall remove the president, the vice president, and all civil officers. Did you know that all civil officers part? Eric Holder's a civil officer.
Yeah.
He should be impeached.
Yes.
Wasn't he found guilty of contempt?
Yes.
Yes.
Isn't that what we impeached Bill Clinton for?
Yes.
Yes.
So why aren't we impeaching Eric Holder?
Why?
Congressmen will probably tell you, oh, well, it's an election year. I'm sorry, I missed that caveat in Article 2, Section 4 that says you shall impeach unless it's an election year. Well, just before you think we were better off in 1100 England than we are today, rest assured Henry didn't believe a word he was signing his name to. He was simply appeasing the people. But remember, it's not about the government. It's about the people. And the people are having an awakening of this understanding of liberty. And in 1200 now, they've got the most evil king that England has ever known. His name is John. The people of England describe John and say that even hell was fouled by the presence of John. John was an evil, oppressive taxation king. He invented income tax for the English people, by the way. But that's not why he was evil and oppressive. You see, if you could not pay taxes in John's kingdom, which was highly likely at the level of taxes he was imposing, you were arrested, you were mutilated, you were executed. They said he was ruthless and vicious. You guys know John, you probably don't even realize it. How many of you have heard of Robin Hood?
Yeah.
Right? Meet King John. Can we take just a second, we've got time, take just a second to show you how deep your socialist indoctrination goes? What is Robin Hood's claim to fame?
Stole from the rich and gave to the poor.
Rob from the rich and give to the poor. Nope, sorry. Robin Hood was not engaged in a grand socialist experiment of redistribution of wealth. They've co-opted even our legends. Robin Hood was taking the money from King John, which had been stolen from the people through oppressive taxation, returning it to the people so they could literally live to see another day. You can find the proof even in a children's tale. How many of you have seen the Disney version of Robin Hood? See, I live in Florida. I think it's a requirement of the citizens of Florida to see every Disney movie at least 4 times. So go watch it. It's a really cute movie. If you've seen it, so go watch it again with a new set of eyes. What you'll see is King John standing over money saying, taxes, taxes, glorious taxes, bleed them dry with beautiful taxes. His best friend's a snake, by the way. And you'll see Robin Hood, who is a fox, always stealing from the king in the court, returning the money to the people, so that seconds later the sheriff of Nottingham, the agent of the king, the tax collector, could come in and take that money away again. All over Europe, this religion fighting that religion, England was dealing with some civil wars, and Charles was telling the people, we have to fund these wars in order to keep you safe. We have to provide resources and provisions for these battles to keep the English people safe. But they started noticing something about Charles, that he was talking out of both sides of his mouth. Though this time he's telling them that he's funding these wars to keeping them safe, they start watching how he's funding them and realizing that he's actually funding the enemy and not keeping his promise. Charles was brought forward on charges of treason. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. bringing the fourth document in the genealogy of our Constitution, the Grand Remonstrance of 1641, another list of grievances against Charles I on how he's violated the Petition of Rights, the Magna Carta, and broken his promise in the 1100 Charter of Liberties. It says this: "The root of all this mischief we find to be a malignant and pernicious design of subverting the fundamental laws and principles of government upon which the religion and justice of this kingdom are firmly established." Now that was a lot of words. I want to point out two important things in this declaration. Number one, they said this: the root of all this mischief. What mischief? The subverting of liberty. That word subvert means to overturn and undermine. The undermining and overturning of liberty is the result of a malignant and pernicious design. The people are saying, we've been watching this now for 600 years. We're seeing a pattern here. Tyranny follows the same bag of tricks every single time. Corruption of the court system, infiltration of foreign law, dissolving of property rights, the government inserting itself in the churches, oppressive taxation without proper representation, manipulation of the monetary system, and disarming the people while the government stays armed. The malignant and pernicious design. And then they said, here it is in 1641, these principles were firmly established. I thought to myself, firmly established in 1641. What happened in the last 370 years? If it was firmly established then, what happened to us? I mean, have we become so intellectually advanced that we're not falling prey to the malignant and pernicious design? I mean, are we seeing corruption of our court systems, infiltration of foreign law, taxation without proper representation? Certainly we're not seeing the government trying to assert itself in the churches or a dissolution of our property rights. And our government would never think to manipulate the economy or try to disarm us, would they? Well, if we're seeing the malignant and pernicious design, and it was firmly established in 1641, what has happened? The malignant and pernicious design happened. They stole our history from us. They purposely kept it hidden. Have you ever heard that phrase, those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it? Let me fix that for you just a little bit, because it's not entirely true. Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and as the lamp of but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and as the lamp of history. I know no way to judge your future but by your past. Alexander Hamilton said, experience is the oracle of truth, and where its responses are unequivocal, they ought to be held to be sacred. You know what they're telling us? History always repeats itself. There is nothing new under the sun. Human nature never changes. So those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. If we had known this history, we may not be in this situation. But how many of you have heard of the glorious revolution of 1688? I travel the country, and it doesn't matter what size of group I have, maybe one or two people. One or two people. Whether it's 8 or 8,000. And we don't know the glorious revolution of 1688.
I've heard of it, but I'm not sure exactly what it was.
Well, it is the linchpin to all this history. It's the key to understanding and maintaining the knowledge of our malignant and pernicious design. You know, I teach students. I teach high school and middle school students a 90-minute practical exercise on government. We create states, we elect representatives, we have a constitution, and I give them some very challenging legislative issues. Now, I do this to homeschool and private school groups. I'd love to do it in the government schools, but they don't let me. But I always ask the students this question: who fought in the Revolutionary War? I get the same answer: the British and the Americans. But you know what? There were no Americans in our Revolutionary War. They were Americans by geography only. By nationality, they were proud British citizens. Proud British citizens. But you know we have let generations after generations of people believe a lie? Not without consequence. You see, if we believe that the Revolutionary War was fought between the Americans and the British, then we believe that the Revolutionary War was a foreign war. But it was not. It was a civil war. We're a ragtag bunch of revolutionaries. The historians will tell you only 30% of the population was in favor of breaking away from the king. And of that 30%, only 30% of those were actively engaged in the revolution, which means roughly 9% of 3 million people, armed with black powder muskets, mind you, overthrew the most powerful government in the world. The sun never set on the British Empire, right? Can you imagine the value a government would have in hiding that bit of history from its people? That it only takes about 9% of a population to stand for liberty against a tyrannical government. Well, not only that, if you believe that the Revolutionary War was fought between the Americans and the British, and you believe that it was a foreign war, you have to ask yourself, who are the Americans? What is their history? What is their heritage? Where did the Americans come from? Well, you know, they're Americans. Well, what is their heritage? Well, we have that melting pot thing going on, right? Which means it's just a bunch of goo. We're not really quite sure where it came from or what it means. And then, when you think that, then it's not a stretch of the imagination to believe that our framers had no idea what they were doing when they drafted the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights. We can, after all, believe, as one man said, they were winging it. They were just sort of inventing all these principles and seeing what would work. And then, it's not so much of an even further stretch to believe that they created a fundamentally flawed document that needs our ever-advanced intellect to redefine on a daily basis. And there you have it, a summary of the living, breathing lie. Living, breathing document, because our country was not founded by Americans. They were not making this stuff up. They were not inventing anything. They were proud British citizens with a history. A history that included the glorious revolution of 1688. A revolution against James II, who was going the way of Charles and John and Henry and William. He was corrupting the courts with his judges, incorporating foreign law, taking the land from the private landowners, giving it to his wife's foreign friends, putting his agents into the churches to control the people and collect his taxes. He was disarming the people while the government stayed armed. You name it, he did it. 5 ministers petitioned the king for their grievances. They had the right to do that in 1688. Our founders didn't even invent that one. And the king threw them in prison. He charged them with a crime called seditious libel. Seditious libel said it's against the law to disagree with the king. Punishable by death. Now, I suppose James learned from Charles and realized that you've got to give them their habeas corpus, because if you don't give them their day in court, you lose your head. That's what happened to Charles. So in this law, it's incorporated, you have your right to habeas corpus, but another provision was set in this law that said, truth is no defense. So even if you're right, you're wrong, because it's against the law to disagree with the king. 5 ministers who should have been put to death if the judges had been following the law, because sometimes judges ought not follow the law when it's unconstitutional. 5 ministers that should have been put to death according to the law were acquitted because of the miracle of the glorious revolution of 1688. The glorious revolution of 1688 brought us the 5th document in the genealogy of our Constitution, the English Bill of Rights of 1689. The English Bill of Rights of 1689 enlisted list of grievances against James II on how he's violated the Grand Remonstrance, the Petition of Right, the Magna Carta, and broken his promise in the 1100 Charter of Liberties. And the English Bill of Rights was the document that our proud British founders carried to this nation, so that when George III was going the way of James and Charles and John and Henry and William, they didn't have to invent anything. They had the written proof right there in their hands. The English Bill of Rights says this: whereas the late King James II, by the assistance of evil counselors, judges, and ministers employed by him, did endeavor to subvert and extirpate the Protestant religion and the laws and liberties of this kingdom. I looked up that word extirpate, by the way. It means to completely destroy. Can I ask you a silly question? If you completely destroy something, is there anything left? Otherwise it'd be mostly destroyed, right? Or partially destroyed. And the people of England were saying what James II was doing was an attempt to completely destroy liberty. And they made a list. You have to read the list. But I'm going to give you one of them. By assuming and exercising a power of dispensing with and suspending laws and the execution of laws without the consent of Parliament. Because you see, they had separation of powers in 1688. They had a judicial branch. They had a legislative branch in Parliament. They had an executive branch in the king. And the king, the executive branch, was writing law, overturning law, and setting aside law when that was a duty and privilege reserved only to the legislative branch of Parliament. And here we have it, in 1689, the declaration that executive orders are an attempt to completely destroy liberty. That's what our executive orders are used for today, to write law, set aside law, overturn law. Presidents don't have that power. They were never intended to have that power. That power was reserved solely to the legislative branch. But where is Congress? Why aren't they getting angry about this? Somebody's stealing their power. Parliament stood up against James II. Why isn't Congress standing up against our presidents? Well, to their defense, I did receive an email from Mitch McConnell asking me to sign a petition to demand that the president stop stealing legislative power. My head exploded. I got really, really angry. And then when I calmed down, I started feeling sorry for Mr. McConnell because I realized he's in Washington and they don't know anything about the Constitution up there. And so I sat down and I wrote Mr. McConnell an email. I went about explaining to him separation of powers. I told him that our framers engaged in a very interesting debate over separation of powers. They didn't invent it, they didn't make it up, they actually had several models to choose from, and they debated over which was the best. They had the Virginia model, for example, which said there'll be 3 branches of government, separate and distinct, and they never do meet. That was it. The opponents to this method called it the parchment barrier plan. Because the only thing that kept the branches from stealing each other's power were the barriers on paper and the honor of the men. Now, they didn't think that the majority of the framers didn't feel like that was going to be enough to keep the branches in line, so they looked to a model, the Massachusetts model, which was based on a philosopher by the name of Montesquieu. Montesquieu said that liberty must be supported, and the only way it can survive is if you have 3 branches of government separate and distinct. Never do they share powers, but they blend in checks and balances. And so I explained to Mr. McConnell that our founders wisely chose the checks and balance model of Montesquieu, which meant that our Constitution declares that we have 3 branches of government. They cannot share power. But the other side of that coin demands that if one branch steals from the other, if the executive branch steals from the legislative branch, it is the duty and constitutional obligation of the Congress to fight back. And then I restrained myself all I could. And I told him in my email, you know what, Mr. McConnell? It's about time you pulled up your big boy pants, did your job, and stopped whining to us about it. Now, it's probably no mystery to you that no surprise to you that I never got a response from Mr. McConnell. Other than the fact that I was dropped from his email list. But you see, government never gets it. It's got to come from the people. We have got to become reacquainted with these fundamental principles so that we can be encouraged. I looked up that word encouraged. I was a Russian linguist in the Army. I'm an attorney. I love words. I love looking up definitions because they don't mean what we think they mean quite often. And I looked up that word encourage, and I found out that that word encourage means to be infused with courage. Isn't that a whole lot richer than just saying encouraged? Yeah. You see, we've got to know what John Adams knew in order to be infused with the courage that he had, that Washington had, that Jefferson had, that Penelope and Mercy had, where they could stand and say, life and fortune and sacred honor, give me liberty or give me death. John Adams said in his inaugural address, if we are to have a free Republican government, we must have an attachment to the Constitution and make a conscientious determination to support it. I could not have an attachment to my husband if I simply read his biography every now and again. Adams said you must have an attachment to the Constitution. I'm not very popular with the politicians, okay? They call me a zealot, right? They tell me I'm not pragmatic enough. I had a congressman in Arizona get upset with me at a town hall meeting and scream at me and tell me that we'll never get anywhere unless we learn to compromise the Constitution. Because 50% of the people, he said, in the population don't believe it. So we've got to learn to compromise. Now, my friend was sitting next to me, so she kept me in the chair. But you see, I have an attachment to the Constitution. That means it's stuck. You can't separate me from it. I believe that the liberty that it guarantees is a gift from God. And I believe that men and women have died so I can have it. And my reasonable sacrifice is to stand attached to it. Because then and only then can you have a conscientious determination to support it. You see, you know the death of liberty occurs in 12 inches. You can know liberty here. But until it becomes here, you cannot make a conscientious determination to support it. But our Constitution says that we are to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. You see, they bought liberty for us. We're not fighting for us. Richard Henry Lee said, we are building a nation for ages and millions yet unborn. Our obligation to fight for liberty has nothing to do with our economy today. Has nothing to do with my right to be outside and complain about the government. It has nothing to do with our right to sit in this room right now. And has everything to do with her right to do that. Because we are tasked with purchasing her liberty. Because our liberty has already been purchased for us. You see, I don't need the motivation. I understand we are the last bastion of hope. I understand we are the shining city on a hill. I understand we have an obligation to the world. But I can't get a grasp of that. That's a little too big for me. But I can tell you, every every single day when I wake up and I have to look at my 6-year-old and try to figure out how I'm going to explain to him how a nation of people thought cell phones and flat screen TVs and eating out and going on vacations was more important than his right to free speech and freedom of religion and freedom of press and his right to bear arms and his right to be free from government unreasonable search and seizures. How do I explain that to him? And then I just determined myself that I was not going to get to the end of this road with any such regrets. I am going to do everything I can to prevent that from happening.
Thank you.
Everything. This is a ministry for us. I travel upwards of 6,000 miles a month in my car. That's not how far I fly. I've spent 2 consecutive nights in my home since September. Now, I don't tell you that so that you think I'm a great person. That's not why I'm telling you that. I'm telling you that because it's just that important. And I don't charge anything for what I do. We work solely on the sale of the books and love offerings. We made a commitment to step out by faith and let God provide for us and not look to the government for provision. Because men and women died for the gift that God gave us. And my child deserves that same gift. And it's our responsibility. Let me tell you what Winston Churchill said. Still, if you will not fight for the right when you can easily win without bloodshed, if you will not fight when your victory will be sure and not too costly, you may come to the moment when you will have to fight with all the odds against you and only a precarious chance of survival. There may even be a worse case. You may have to fight when there is no hope of victory, because it is better to perish than to live as slaves.
Yes.
You see,
Amen.
if we don't do everything that we need to do, if we don't do everything that we humanly and superhumanly can do, we will not suffer. We won't make that decision. We'll be inconvenienced. We won't be oppressed. But we will condemn our children to buy back a gift that has been purchased for us. And they won't do it at the ballot box. They will do it with musket, and they will shed their blood. So that's why I hope. That's why I teach. Not so I can teach you and you can learn some really cool, interesting facts about history, but so that you will take this information with you and go and teach others. I need your help. Can you help me with something? I need you to spread the word about this ministry. I'm all by myself, just me and my husband. We don't have the funds to hire a marketing firm. But all I want you to do is just spread the word. Did you learn something tonight? Do you believe what you have learned is vital to the restoration of the principles that make this nation great?
Yeah.
Then tell people about it. Tell people about it. I got to meet Glenn Beck last Friday in Florida. Speak to him for about 10 minutes. Now, I didn't know, but I think somebody told me that people don't speak to Beck that long unless they're family members. So
That's right.
I felt really honored for that. And he said he wants to have me on his show. Now, he said he wanted to have me on his show this week while I was in Texas, but I haven't heard from his crew. So you can help me by writing them and encouraging them.
Get you on the flag.
Because if we are going to get this out, I got to find a way where I don't have to travel to Seattle, right? So I'm just asking you for all the help that you can give us. But first and foremost, will you please pray for us? Please pray for us, because we do not fight flesh and blood. This is not a battle between Democrats and Republicans. This is not a battle between liberty and tyranny. This is a battle between good and evil.
Yes.
The same battle that started in the garden, where evil tried to separate a man from his wife so that he could separate men from God. That's what we're fighting here. And the good news is, we've already won. We must be obedient, diligent in our stand for liberty. So I want to thank you so much for coming. Now I handed out my cards. Turn them over on the back. You'll see some writing. I have a nationally syndicated radio show now. It airs every Sunday at 3 o'clock. You can go to that website and see if you have a station that carries it. If you do not have a station that carries it, there are several ways that you can listen on your cell phone, or you can listen on your computer, or you can even just listen to the archives. So that's some way I continue to teach and spread the message and share this information with all your Facebook and email friends. Thank you so much. I forgot to mention, I do have books back there. I have a book called Not a Living, Breathing Document. That's the easiest way to take home what you've learned here today. I also have a book called Liberty First, The Path to Restoring America, 10 things that we can do as citizens to help restore these principles. And you don't have to form a $3 million PAC. You don't have to have money from the Koch brothers. This is something that you can do as individuals. I also have 2 children's books that teach the history that I've taught here tonight, because if we don't teach our children, they're being taught the enemy is our friend. So thank you.
Let me say that the steering committee has decided they wanted to support KrisAnne, but I think as a group we could do more than that. So whatever we get in the bucket tonight, we'll go to KrisAnne. We spent a pretty good ad budget to get folks here. A donation was made to cover this facility, but let's just say that everything we get tonight will go to KrisAnne. And I want a copy of that book. I put $10 on your table, but I'm going to put some more out there. It's an amazing lesson that we just learned. It taught us all. We've got a great teacher in David. He does a great job teaching the Constitution. Once a month for us, guys. And so we meet weekly. Want you to know, Trinity Church is where we meet each week, each Monday night, 6 o'clock. Please be there. And what do you think about this banner? You think the pastor's going to let us leave it up till Sunday? I don't know. You better come find out. We'll see what Jeff decides to do. I wouldn't doubt that some of what we hear tonight gets wrapped into what he shares on Sunday. We'd love to have you here. We'd love, if you don't have a church home, for you to make this your home also. It'd be a blessing. Let me close in prayer and dismiss us all. Father, thank you so much for weaving a consistent pattern with the truth that KrisAnne shared with us, Lord, the truth of history, the places in history where your finger reached down and did a miraculous thing. You dealt with monarchs with ultimate power, and you manifested your power in a way that preserved and created this perfect Constitution. And I say perfect, it's not perfect like Scripture, but it's what you designed for your people to live under in this time and in this age. And Lord, I pray that you'll preserve the Constitution by the thoughts and the words and the actions of us as a body and of us individually, that we'll do exactly what KrisAnne has charged us to do, that we'll bring this to the workplace, we'll bring it to our schools, to our families. We will consistently study these things. We will understand the most valuable gifts that you've given us, and we will preserve those things for our children should you tarry. I pray your blessing on her travels. I pray you give her safe and secure and prosperous exposure to the rest of this nation. I pray that our nation turns back to our Constitution, but even more, Lord, that it turns back to you. Bless our travels tonight. Thank you for a wonderful day. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you all.